We have already spoken of the moral dissolution which, in itself, is only another form of despair. The worst situation is that of those workers who have to compete against a machine that is making its way. The price of the goods which they produce adapts itself to the price of the kindred product of the machine, and as the latter works more cheaply, its human competitor has but the lowest wages. The same thing happens to every operative employed upon an old machine in competition with later improvements. And who else is there to bear the hardship? The manufacturer will not throw out his old apparatus, nor will he sustain the loss upon it. Out of the dead mechanism he can make nothing, so he fastens upon the living worker, the universal scapegoat of society. Of all the workers in competition with machinery, the most ill-used are the handloom cotton weavers. They receive the most trifling wages, and, with full work, are not in a position to earn more than 10 shillings a week. One class of woven goods after another is annexed by the power loom, and hand weaving is the last refuge of workers thrown out of employment in other branches, so that the trade is always overcrowded. Hence it comes that, in average seasons, the hand weaver counts himself fortunate if he can earn 6 or 7 shillings a week, while to reach this sum he must sit at his loom 14 to 18 hours a day. Most woven goods require moreover a damp weaving room, to keep the weft from snapping, and in part, for this reason, in part because of their poverty, which prevents them from paying for better dwellings, the workrooms of these weavers are usually without wooden or paved floors. I have been in many dwellings of such weavers, in remote, vile courts and alleys, usually in cellars. Often half a dozen of these handloom weavers, several of them married, live together in a cottage with 1 or 2 workrooms, and 1 large sleeping room. Their food consists almost exclusively of potatoes, with perhaps oatmeal porridge, rarely milk, and scarcely ever meat. Great numbers of them are Irish, or of Irish descent. And these poor handloom weavers, first to suffer from every crisis, and last to be relieved from it, must serve the bourgeoisie as a handle, in meeting attacks upon the factory system. "See," cries the bourgeois, triumphantly, "see how these poor creatures must famish, while the mill operatives are thriving, and then judge the factory 140 system." As though it were not precisely the factory system and the machinery belonging to it which had so shamefully crushed the handloom weavers, and as though the bourgeoisie did not know this quite as well as ourselves. But the bourgeoisie has interests at stake, and so a falsehood or two, and a bit of hypocrisy won't matter much. Let us examine somewhat more closely the fact that machinery more and more supersedes the work of men. The human labor, involved in both spinning and weaving, consists chiefly in piecing broken threads, as the machine does all the rest. This work requires no muscular strength, but only flexibility of finger. Men are, therefore, not only not needed for it, but actually, by reason of the greater muscular development of the hand, less fit for it than women and children, and are, therefore, naturally almost superseded by them. Hence, the more the use of the arms, the expenditure of strength, can be transferred to steam or water power, the fewer men need be employed, and as women and children work more cheaply, and in these branches better than men, they take their places. In the spinning mills women and girls are to be found in almost exclusive possession of the throstles. Among the mules one man, an adult spinner with self-actors, he too, becomes superfluous, and several pieces for tying the threads, usually children or women, sometimes young men of from 18 to 20 years, here and there an old spinner 141 thrown out of other employment. At the power looms women, from 15 to 20 years, are chiefly employed, and a few men. These, however, rarely remain at this trade after their 21st year. Among the preparatory machinery too, women alone are to be found, with here and there a man to clean and sharpen the carding frames. Besides all these, the factories employ numbers of children offers for mounting and taking down bobbins, and a few men as overlookers, a mechanic and an engineer for the steam engines, carpenters, porters, etc., but the actual work of the mills is done by women and children. This the manufacturers deny. They published last year elaborate tables to prove that machinery does not supersede adult male operatives. According to these tables, rather more than half of all the factory workers employed, viz., 52%, were females and 48% males, and of those operatives more than half were over 18 years old. So far, so good. But the manufacturers are very careful not to tell us how many of the adults were men, and how many women. And this is just the point. Besides this, they have evidently counted the mechanics, engineers, carpenters, all the men employed in any way in the factories, perhaps even the clerks, and still they have not the courage to tell the whole truth. These publications teem generally with falsehoods, perversions, crooked statements, with calculations of averages, that prove a great deal for the timid reader and nothing for the initiated, and with suppressions of facts bearing on the most important points, and they prove only the selfish blindness, and want of uprightness of the manufacturers concerned. Let us take some of the statements of a speech with which Lord Ashley introduced the 10 Hours Bill, March 15, 1844, into the House of Commons. Here he gives some data as to the relations of sex and age of the operatives, not yet refuted by the manufacturers, whose statements, as quoted above, cover moreover only a part of the manufacturing industry of England. Of 419,560 factory operatives of the British Empire in 1839, 192,887, or nearly half, were under 18 years of age, and 242,296 of the female sex, of whom 112,192 were less than 18 years old. There remain, therefore, 80,695 male operatives under 18 years, and 96,569 adult male operatives, or not one full quarter of the whole number. In the cotton factories, 56.25%, in the woolen mills, 69.5%, in the silk mills, 70.5%, in the flax spinning mills, 70.5% of all operatives are of the female sex. These numbers suffice to prove the crowding out of adult males. But you have only to go into the nearest mill, to see the fact confirmed. Hence follows of necessity that inversion of the existing social order which, being forced upon them, has the most ruinous consequences for the workers. The employment of women at once breaks up the family, for when the wife spends 12 or 13 hours every day in the mill, and the husband works the same length of time there or elsewhere, what becomes of the children? They grow up like wild weeds, they are put out to nurse for a shilling or 18p a week, and how they are treated may be imagined. Hence the accidents to which little children fall victims multiply in the factory districts to a terrible extent. The lists of the coroner of Manchester 143A showed for 9 months 69 deaths from burning, 56 from drowning, 23 from falling, 77 from other causes, or a total of 225. 143 deaths from accidents, while in non-manufacturing Liverpool during 12 months there were but 146 fatal accidents. The mining accidents are excluded in both cases, and since the coroner of Manchester has no authority in Salford, the population of both places mentioned in the comparison is about the same. The Manchester Guardian reports 1 or more deaths, by burning in almost every number. That the general mortality among young children must be increased by the employment of the mothers is self-evident, and is placed beyond all doubt by notorious facts. Women often return to the mill 3 or 4 days after confinement, leaving the baby, of course, in the dinner hour they must hurry home, to feed the child and eat something, and what sort of suckling that can be is also evident. Lord Ashley repeats the testimony of several workwomen. M.H., 20 years old, has 2 children, the youngest a baby, that is tended by the other, a little older. The mother goes to the mill shortly after 5 o'clock in the morning, and comes home at 8 at night. All day the milk pours from her breasts, so that her clothing drips with it. H.W. has 3 children, goes away Monday morning at 5 o'clock, and comes back Saturday evening, has so much to do for the children then, that she cannot get to bed before 3 o'clock in the morning, often wet through to the skin, and obliged to work in that state. She said, "My breasts have given me the most frightful pain, and I have been dripping wet with milk." The use of narcotics, to keep the children still, is fostered by this infamous system, and has reached a great extent in the factory districts. Dr. Johns, Registrar-in-Chief for Manchester, is of opinion that this custom is the chief source of the many deaths from convulsions. The employment of the wife dissolves the family utterly and of necessity, and this dissolution, in our present society, which is based upon the family, brings the most demoralizing consequences for parents as well as children. A mother who has no time to trouble herself about her child, to perform the most ordinary loving services for it during its first year, who scarcely indeed sees it, can be no real mother to the child, must inevitably grow indifferent to it, treat it unlovingly like a stranger. The children who grow up under such conditions are utterly ruined for later family life, can never feel at home in the family which they themselves